Hello and welcome to the Game Lore Archives. I'm Joe.
And I'm Dan, and I bet you're really surprised to see us today so far outside our usual schedule.
The reason why this is a little more out of schedule than it normally is because it was a bit of a passion project. Obviously, we normally do the lore every second week.
Yeah.
The next episode will be up next week from recording, but by the time this goes up, it might be tomorrow or whatever. But yeah, so don't worry about that. Diablo is still going to be fortnightly, and we're just going to basically fit this in when it gets done.
So it's probably time to start discussing the lore of the Sea of Thieves, which is what we're talking about. And I've actually really enjoyed looking into this, as unlike everything else we've done, there's nothing. There's so little lore out there. There's couple of lore books, comics, and little bits scattered about. Is so bare bones, and even the devs are only releasing the lore really slowly in little episodes in the game, meaning we've almost been creating part of the theories ourselves. Now that does mean that a lot of the content in this series is going to be more speculation on our part, but obviously if the devs release anything that's ever made concrete, we'll make a new episode to address that.
In all our series, we create a huge timeline and then normally do our episodes in chronological order from there, meaning that, like Diablo and Elder Scrolls, their series begin with the creation of the universe. But on this occasion, the series is slightly different as it is set on Earth. If not a slightly more magical Earth, but we think Earth nonetheless. And not only do we think that we can prove it, but also its exact location.
And that's exactly what this episode is about. Where the Sea of Thieves is, and the older civilizations that used to live on it.
It's kind of almost like a creation episode.
Yeah, as close as it's going to get.
Yes.
So, when you first start the Sea of Thieves, only for the very first time, you wake in a tavern with your head on the table, with a banana and a map of the Sea of Thieves in front of you. I'll put a screenshot on the screen now, and you'll see in the bottom right hand corner of this map La Isla Mosquito, which roughly translates into Mosquito Island. Now, according to this map, Mosquito Island is the southeast of the Sea of Thieves and Lower Bay is to the north. Well, if you jump onto Google Maps and type in Mosquito Island and select the one in the British Virgin Isles, it's located in the Caribbean. And there it is. And then head north and you will see a larger island called the Settlement. And you've got to zoom in really closely, but in the sea, just below the settlement, is actually called Lower Bay, meaning the magical sea must be between these two islands.
So the next question that needs answering is, when does the game take place? The British Virgin Islands make a lot of sense for the game about pirates, as piracy largely took place in the Caribbean and was at its height between 1650s and 1720s.
And this is real world. We're not talking Sea of Thieves here. We're talking real world history.
Yeah. And in that 70-year period, there were 3 different eras of piracy. The first era took place between 1650 to 1680-ish, where English and French ships attacked the Spanish colonies sailing through the Caribbean and East Pacific Ocean. Then, in the 1690s, piracy reached its second era, moving away from the Caribbean and into the Indian Ocean and the Red Sea until the third era, where it returned back to the Caribbean, as well as North America and West Africa, and those coastlines between sort of 1716 and 1726 in that 10-year period. So, with all these dates set in stone, we can kind of begin to theorise a potential date. The first crew to find the Sea of Thieves as it is today was led by Captain Ramsay,
who you are going to hear so much about, as so much of the lore revolves around him and his crew, but we'll go into details kind of trickling through an episode and then discuss him completely one episode.
He's a pretty important man, isn't he?
He is.
So we know Ramsay sailed the sea for about 20 to 25 years. He left his children behind to grow up and follow him into the Sea of Thieves.
And one of these children we know are in the Sea of Thieves today, because it was actually the one that featured in the trailer for the arena update.
You came here for something new!
And with this in mind, I believe Ramsey's crew found the Sea of Thieves between sort of 1650s, 1680s. And so the game is set during the Third Era between the years 1716 and 1726.
Now, Ramsey's crew might have been the first to navigate through the Devil's Shroud, which is the fog that surrounds it, which we'll discuss next episode. However, the islands that they discovered had ancient cave paintings dotted around the islands, meaning that an ancient civilization lived there long ago, and anyone that's played the game can contest to these cave paintings that are still there. So, obviously we don't know what happened, for sure, and there isn't a definitive answer found in the game. So, firstly, let's share a little bit about what we do know about this civilization, and then we'll tell you our theories of what could have happened to them.
The ancient civilization was smart and learned massive amounts of knowledge about the world around them. Eventually they discovered certain spots in the Sea of Thieves where magic manifested. They marked these locations with rock paintings, believing that the pictures would transcend written word for future generations. As they studied these locations, they began to learn to harness the magic, and eventually temples constructed and used as places of worship. As their knowledge and powers grew, they learned to imbue items with this magic, creating the very first magical artifacts, with the powers to inflict great boons or terrible curses. As their knowledge grew, the humans realised they shared this world with another race, the merfolk.
Again, who we'll discuss in another episode.
And so they wanted to cultivate a relationship with the mer, so they used their magic to craft magical earrings that allowed them to understand the merfolk, and constructed underwater chambers the two races could meet in. Suddenly, however, the humans seemed to vanish from the Sea of Thieves, leaving the merfolk all alone.
So as we mentioned earlier, the exact reason for their disappearance isn't known, and maybe it never will be. However, we do have a few ideas. The first ties the magical nature of the Sea of Thieves in with the depictions of real-world monsters quite nicely. When you look at old ancient maps drawn between the 13th and the 15th century, you can see many of those maps depicting huge sea monsters across the globe.
In real life, this happened for two reasons. In the earlier days, the maps are often wrong as the world was still being explored. This means that the artists would hear accounts of creatures the sailors had seen on their travels and draw it from the sailor's memory. Then, in later years, added them for artistic embellishment to increase the map's value.
But obviously in the Sea of Thieves, the Kraken and Megalodon are very real threats. So what's to say that all of these other creatures depicted on the maps aren't? Maybe the ancients realised that the destruction these creatures were causing across the planet and used their knowledge of the area and the magic to create the Devil's Shroud, to capture and contain these creatures in the frog. Then, thanks to the decreased sightings across the world, depictions of the maps just stopped being drawn.
It's a fun theory, and it's one that we did quite like for quite some time. But when we put our head together, we came up with a slightly more convincing theory, which we feel makes quite a lot of sense. We think that these ancient beings might be the Taino. The word Taino translates to men of the good, and were the indigenous people of many of the Caribbean islands, including the Dominican Republic, Cuba, the Bahamas, and most importantly, Puerto Rico, which is right next to Mosquito Island. In the year 1492, once again this is real world, in the year 1492 Christopher Columbus invaded the area and enslaved a lot of the Taino people. Then shortly after, in the years 1518 to 1519, a smallpox epidemic swept through the Taino on these islands, killing around 90% of the population, and we believe that the same thing happened to the islands long before the Devil's Shroud appears. Backing up this theory with the Taino's religion, which is centered on the worship of a deity or some sort of ancestral spirit known as a Zemis, and they often depicted their Zemis in art, including a depiction of a 3-point Zemis. Now, I know it's not perfect, but have you ever noticed how often the triangles actually appear in the ancient cave paintings?
And putting a 3-point Zemi on screen, you'll notice how similar they are.
Yeah, it's amazing.
I honestly love this theory, and I think it's the closest thing to an answer we're ever going to get. Which means that's the end of the episode, and I would suggest you subscribe and ring the notifications bell, because, as I say, these episodes are going to be really sporadic. And if you've got any counter theories, or if you agree with us, then obviously let us know, and we'll speak to you in the comments.